welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. It is May 2nd. I am your host, Tommy Brzee, and we have an awesome show for you today. We're going to start, in fact, the first half of the show actually is going to be a lot about Colorado football. There was a very interesting piece that came out from Max Olson in The Athletic that a lot of people have a lot of opinions on. So I wanted to take the first segment today and kind of just talk about what that article said. It feels like a lot of the quotes might have been taken just at face value and not really, really read the full context of the article. I think it was a little bit more fair than some people are suggesting. So I wanted to get into what exactly it said and kind of some of the reaction to it. But then in the second segment, we'll really get to the reaction fully and kind of what happened on Twitter right afterwards. Some of you might have seen Deion Sanders and Deion Sanders going back and forth with some people about this topic, and it's created quite the stir in college football, so I felt like it would be a good time to, really get into that and give you my thoughts about all of that. But then we'll get back to kind of normal programming here. We'll talk a little bit of a spring overreactions from the SEC. Tom Fornelli over CBS had this idea. I will not steal any of his overreactions, I do promise you that. But I thought it would be a fun thought experiment, so I went through a couple of the teams and broke down kind of what I took away from this spring for those teams. And then we have another Hot Take Thursday for you, and it's all about how important these couple of months coming up, or really these couple of weeks coming up, are very, very important, not only to the players, but to the coaches, and just developing a team that can compete for a national title. So we'll get to all that throughout the show. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, get your comment on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of your screen. GSMCpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun interactive experience here, ask something that you've been wondering about, maybe call me out on something that I didn't get right or didn't bring up. So it's always fun for both of us when we get to interact a little bit on here. Again, that's GSMCpodcast.net. But let's jump right in and let's talk about this Colorado transfer portal article. There has been a ton of talk around this, and something that has been really just on fire, especially around Twitter the last couple of days. And Deion and Shadur have gotten into that party a little bit, but we'll get to that as we kind of go. I think there was this big talk around when Deion showed up, the way that he kind of handled his first couple of days at Colorado. They had that infamous video where he walks into a room full of kids that are fairly uncertain about their future and tells them essentially, a lot of you are not going to have positions on this team. A lot of you are going to have to find other places to play. He was bringing his Louis with him, as he says. So that obviously started this off on quite the interesting foot and made a lot of people watch what was going to happen over the next little bit. And what happened was the craziest turnover that I've ever seen, and I think anyone's ever seen in college football history. We saw 53 players leave that program throughout. When he came to the school to the start of the season, we had 87 new guys jump into the program. It was absolutely insane what had to be done during that first year. And that's kind of what this article is about. They talk about the 53 kids that found their way out of the program. They talk about their experiences leading up to having to leave the program and what has happened since with them. Kind of, some have been very successful, some have kind of fallen by the wayside. But mostly the article kind of centers around 6 guys that were kind of integral parts of that team prior to the one last year, the 2022 team, which was 1-11, really struggled. One of the characters, in fact, in this is Josh McCown's son, Owen, who was the starting quarterback for Colorado during that 1-11 season, and then obviously found his way out the door. He was one of the 53 that transferred away. But some of the main people that I really want to get into have some very interesting quotes throughout this, and one of them is Chase Sewell, a player that was on this team for quite some time and definitely did, I apologize for that, and definitely, was a part of this, saw that kind of what was going on throughout this process, and he had some very interesting quotes kind of talking about what happened when he was getting cut, and kind of the atmosphere around the team as he was around it. So first he said he did not sugarcoat it. He was telling me, you're coming off an injury. I don't think you're going to be one of the guys that needs to start this year. We need guys that are going to be ready to play for right now. So I think it's one of those things that's just it obviously set this guy off a little bit on a weird foot. Obviously, these are not going to be easy conversations. The idea that it was going to be sugarcoated probably was not going to be a thing. But I think there's so many different things that I think could play a big part here, and I think one of the things that will be a huge thing in this kind of process. I apologize, I was looking at a comment over here, but I think when you talk about that comment in particular, you see kind of the reality of college football. There are a lot of these conversations that happen across the country every single year. Now, the reality of this situation is he had about 20 conversations in a day that went the exact same way, saying you probably don't have a position on this team, you might want to find somewhere else to play. Maybe he didn't say it quite as nicely as that, but he did a ton of conversations over, a 24-hour period, and then 53 guys kind of slowly matriculated into the portal. So it created this kind of weird divide, it felt like, in the team, and Sewell kind of gets into it when he talks about this. He says, it felt like it was us versus them instead of all of us together. That's the best way he could put it. He said the new guys were kind of against the players that had already been there. It wasn't a great environment. It wasn't a team environment. So I totally understand that. I mean, from the outside looking in, that's what it felt like, right? When you were talking about, Deion bringing his Louis along with him and all of these different things that were kind of thrown out there by him, it felt like it was kind of going to be that approach in at least the early stages of Colorado football, and it seemed to have been. And I think that's a thing that you wish didn't happen, but when you're bringing in that many new kids and so many kids are walking out the door, so many kids are left over from a team that apparently they had felt like they had really bonded over that 1-11 season and really had found their kind of footing towards the end of it, and then this came in and kind of put all that away, right? Now, Chase Sewell was not necessarily all negative towards Deion. He did say that it wasn't like he was being aggressive towards him or being mean in any way. He was just kind of telling him how it is. That's just kind of the reality of this situation. He was just saying, prove to me that you can play, which was another thing that he threw out there during this conversation. And I think it totally makes sense, right? It's one of those things that I think in college football, we'd love for all of these conversations to go over beautifully and all of these kids to find exactly where they'd love to play and thrive and wherever that situation is. That's not always how it works, right? There has to be tough conversations. There has to be conversations that are going to make guys upset, and that's just kind of the way of things. So Sewell overall, I mean, he found his way to ECU, became their wide receiver one last year, so he's in a great spot, has done some incredible things, and it really felt like it worked out better for him at the end of the day. But definitely some very interesting quotes here where you talk about how this was handled and how, kind of the environment around Colorado at that time. Some of it obviously was necessary. Some of it just kind of had to happen, but some of it not so much, right? Some of it definitely could have been avoided. But one of the big talking points around this, because of what I'm going to talk about in the next segment actually, was a quote that came from Xavier Smith, who is a defensive back, I believe a corner, that transferred out, found his way to Austin Peay, and he kind of talks about his experience when he was eventually cut from the team. And the way it usually went was it would be one player going into a room and talking to Deion, and he would tell them pretty much, pack your bags. Not in that vernacular, obviously, but that's the gist of these conversations. With Xavier Smith, it was a little bit different. He was brought in with another teammate, and he was brought into the room with Charles Kelly, who was the defensive coordinator, who then told him, obviously, that he had to find a new place to play and probably would not be on the Colorado team much longer. So that obviously made him fairly upset. And this was one of the quotes that got a lot of traction on Twitter and on all of the different social pages the last couple of days. He said, "I was actually getting mad, like tears coming out of my eyes because, bro, you didn't even try to get to know me." And I think that's, a fair reaction, right? You feel like you've gone through not too long with this new staff. You feel like you've only gotten second team and special teams reps, which was his story, and you feel like you just didn't quite get the fair shake that you deserved. And then to be told, find a new place to play, it all goes, it's not ideal by any means. It's not something that you want to hear. It's not something that, frankly, I don't think it's something that these Colorado coaches wanted to do, but it's kind of something that needed to happen. Now, Xavier Smith is doing just fine for himself. He found his way to Austin Peay, was a freshman All-American last year in the FCS, and is now at UTEP because he followed his coach, Scotty Walden, who got that job. And so it sounds like him and his coach now have a much better relationship and are kind of very, very connected. So obviously fantastic for him. Glad he found a great situation. But obviously this created some waves. This idea that, Deion is handling these things, this type of way, and people started to pass judgment. And we'll get to kind of the exact judgment that was being passed in the next segment, but obviously this was going to create eyes. Deion always creates eyes, and there's plenty of people that would love to tear Deion down. Let's put it that way. I think there's plenty of people that are just kind of waiting for that moment to really pounce, and it feels like this was an opening, and frankly, I don't think it really was, but I'll get to that kind of towards the end here. There was one more interesting quote in here that I want to get to. Jake Wiley was an offensive lineman on the 2022 team and then transferred out shortly after Deion got there. I think he stuck around for spring ball and kind of got a little bit of run, but eventually decided to move on. But one of the interesting things he had was he was talking about his group chat in the O-line group, and he said, "In our O-line group chat, one of the offensive line coaches texted the group, said, 'Good luck, fellas,' and removed them from the chat, removed all of them. It was at least 5 people who removed from the chat. We were like, huh, what happened?" So it's kind of this idea that they were handling it as quickly as they possibly could. They weren't super concerned about the optics of how kids were getting let go. They weren't super concerned about, bringing the kid in and letting the kid, have his word in the conversation. So things were going on at Colorado that usually don't necessarily go on. And part of that has to do with just the incredible amount of players that they had to overhaul in this kind of roster craziness that they were dealing with. They had one more story in there about Maddox Kopp, who was a quarterback on that team and found his way to Miami of Ohio, but he was a two-time transfer, so had to kind of fight tooth and nail with the NCAA. Finally got a temporary restraining order to play in Miami of Ohio's bowl game. So a lot of these guys did have to sit out for a year, and a lot of these guys were under very different circumstances depending on where they kind of ended up. And just to give you an idea of where these guys were, so we had 15 go to the Power 5 out of the 53. You had 22 go to the Group of 5. You had 9 to the FCS level, 1 Division 2, 2 to the JUCO, and then 4 guys just unsigned, have just stopped playing football and are, normal college students at this point. So it kind of shows you an interesting thought process here, because 15 guys that go to other Power 5 schools, you would think have a place on a 1-11 roster who was largely considered the worst Power 5 school in the country a year ago. The Group of 5 kids is kind of a hit or miss proposition. Some are, totally capable of playing at Colorado, some not so much. But once you get down to the FCS Division 2, those kids likely were not going to play on Colorado. And that's not necessarily an indictment of them. I'm sure there are plenty of talented players. I mean, Xavier Smith has made quite the career for himself at the FCS level and has now moved back up. But I think when we talk about roster construction in college football, and we talk about how Deion handles things compared to how other people handle things, and there's a million different ways to go about these conversations and to go about roster construction, especially in a time where, you're going to be moving guys around a whole lot, and that's just kind of the way of things. So the big question is, how do you handle it? How do you kind of go about that business? And I think there is a better way to go about it. I think there is a way to be very nice and very caring about these conversations, because it is a tough conversation to have with a kid where you've put in all this effort and now you're telling them essentially pack your bags and find somewhere else to play. It's not a great conversation. I do think there's a better way to go about it. I do think that Colorado maybe cut some corners in some senses in these conversations to make it happen, but there's a huge thing that I feel like people just don't fully understand about this situation. Overturning 53 guys walking out of your room, 87 guys walking into your room, you have to cut corners, especially on things like this, just because roster construction is such a tough thing to do, and piecing together a class that is all over the place and a million new faces and a million guys walking out the door, things had to happen very quickly, and they had to happen. When you looked at that 2022 Colorado team, they had no chance to compete if they kept that same roster but just added in Deion Sanders and Travis Hunter. That just wasn't going to be a reality where they were going to be even a 4-win team like they were in 2023. They would have probably won maybe 2 games. Shadur made him maybe have 1 game that he went absolutely crazy. I don't know. But the reality of this is there were a lot of people that came after Deion for, not caring about his team and not caring about the players and being a little, mean, essentially. And then there were people that came after Max Olson and said that this was bad reporting and he was going after Colorado and he was trying to tear them down. I don't believe either of those things. I think it's insane to think, honestly, both of those things, because the reality is when you're overturning a roster to the degree that Deion had to, sometimes you're going to have to be very blunt, and you almost have to be blunt because you have to get stuff done. There's a million things that have to get done before that team can be ready to go to start the season, and they had to get done quickly. And Deion did, honestly, a pretty remarkable job when you look at how much he had to turn over and what was actually put on the field in the fall. Obviously, a 4-8 record is not what they wanted, but still a pretty crazy turnaround considering all of the things that happened around him. My point being in all of this is just college football, elite sports, all of this stuff, it's cutthroat. That's just the way it is. There's no way around that. There's no way to kind of subside that. This is a professional sport. So Deion, being who he is, where he's going to be blunt, he's going to be direct, and he has a lot of experience in professional sports, he's going to be a little bit more aggressive about these conversations. He's not going to be as, gentle about these conversations because, frankly, last year he just didn't have time to. Now the question is, what happens this year when some of these guys walk out? Does he follow the same way of thinking, and does he kind of continue to do it this way? Because then it could become a problem. I won't argue with that at all. I just think last year was very special circumstances where guys were going to get their feelings hurt, and I wish that wasn't the case, but that's just kind of the way of things. So coming out of this article doesn't really change my opinion of Deion. I knew exactly who Deion was going into this, and I know exactly who he is coming out of this, and it's not much of a different person, frankly. And anyone saying Max Olson is trying to tear down Colorado from this article, I think we've shown, these guys didn't necessarily just tear down Deion. Sewell at the end of the piece said, there's nothing I can really be mad about. I was able to meet Deion Sanders. I was able to be around him for a certain amount of time, and then I found my new place to play. So it's one of those things that we can squabble over whether he should have, put on a little bit more of a kid glove and handle these kids a little bit nicer. But at the end of the day, the roster construction part of it, I have essentially no problem with, just because some stuff just has to happen, and some stuff just has to happen a little bit more quickly and a little bit more aggressively than some of us hope. But that isn't necessarily the end of the conversation, is it? That article was just the start of some of the very, very interesting things that have happened around Colorado football the last couple of days. So we'll get to that and my thoughts about that, because I'm a little bit less inclined to defend Deion on this next part. But stick with us and we will be right back with that.
feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from a basement statement. The top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just went over kind of the article that Max Olson came out about the 53 guys that transferred out of Colorado last year, and kind of got into just what the article actually said, and just went piece by piece because felt like some quotes from that article were be taken at face value and not necessarily looking at the full piece. But let's get into what happened afterwards, because that is the real story here. That's the one that feels like it's been 5 years since we've started this, but it's only been a couple of days. But as I talked about, I have no problem with this piece. I have no problem with Deion Sanders, although there are certain things within that I would have loved to be handled a little bit better. I want Deion to be the one to deliver the news to all these players. I want him to be the one doing the cuts because he's the head coach. I also want, these players to be brought in individually, not in pairs, because I think that's ridiculous. I think there's, a couple of things in there that I would have loved to gone differently, but some of it's the cost of business, and some of it's just kind of being in the position he was in. You got to turn over that roster, and it has to happen quickly, so not necessarily super mad about that. But it did take to Twitter, and problems came fairly quickly. I think a lot of people, first, I believe it started with kind of people coming after Max Olson, mostly Colorado fans kind of not appreciating the way that this was covered, saying that he was coming after Colorado or saying he was trying to bury Colorado in any way. That's not the case. Max Olson's job is to go find very interesting stories around college football and report on them. He did a fantastic job with this piece. This was a piece that was going to come out. And frankly, it could have been a lot more damning if someone really wanted it to be that way. So Max Olson, I think, did a fantastic job showing, how some things were handled a little aggressively, how some things were just fine, and something, there is a gray area in all of this, and I felt like this piece highlighted that really perfectly. So I understand there's going to be people that get mad at Max Olson and come after him or whatever. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. I have no problem with the way that Deion handled this for the most part. I think there's ers and ahs in there that you'd love to be fixed, but overall, no real problem there. Definitely don't have a problem with any of the kids coming forward to, tell their stories, because they should be heard, right? They're very interesting stories of one of the craziest, couple of months in college football history, really, when it comes to one team. So I wanted to hear the story, and I'm very glad that Max Olson wrote it. Now, the part I got mad at, the part that I'm very frustrated about, is what happened on Twitter later. I talked about that Xavier Smith quote where he said he was angry and upset walking out of that meeting. He felt like he didn't get a fair shake from Colorado. All of these different things that kind of went on, and I can't necessarily argue with him. I think there's some truth to what he was saying. He only got, second team and special teams reps. There's only so much you can show in those reps. But some people kind of ran with that, and I kind of want to break down all of the kind of craziness that has come from that. So first it started with The Athletic just putting out that piece and putting out that quote along with another one that kind of detailed a little bit more about what his experience was and how it just wasn't the greatest day for him by any means. It was a little bit aggressive. It just didn't necessarily do the things that it was not his best day. Let's just leave it at that. But then Shadur decided to get in on the conversation. Excuse me. I don't know why the Nebraska picture is in there. I very much apologize for that. But Shadur decided he would respond to the tweet, and he decided he was going to. I'm going to go ahead and bail out of that. Shadur decided he would respond to the tweet and call the kid mid, which essentially just means, not very good, somewhere in the middle of the pack. But he also said he doesn't remember him. He said he must have been mid because I don't remember this guy. Here's the thing. I understand that all of these guys on these teams are not going to be best friends, especially guys that are offense and defensive players. I understand that Deion Sanders had just come onto the team, and there were a lot of people to meet, and there were a lot of people that were going to find their way out of the door, and maybe it's, you won't have the greatest relationship with those guys. Every single team that competes for national titles, every single team that has real title aspirations in this game has elite leadership. And they have it from the position that matters the most, in quarterback. There has been very, very few national title contenders over the last couple of years where if you walked into a practice, you didn't see the quarterback at least handling a certain amount of leadership and kind of being the vocal leader on that field. That goes away fairly quickly if you can't even identify some of the guys on your team. And it's not that I'm, tearing down Shadur for not knowing this guy to a T. He doesn't need to know his favorite food or his favorite color or be best friends by any means. But he's got to be able to be walking down the street and recognize his teammate. I don't care that it's a corner. I don't care that it's a defensive player. The best teams in this country are connected at the hip with everyone. They love everyone that lines up for their team. It doesn't matter if you're a walk-on. It doesn't matter if you're a defensive player. It doesn't matter if you're a second teamer or a special teamer. You know who those guys are. You don't need to know everything about them by any means or be best friends with them, but you definitely shouldn't be so comfortable of going after them that you tweet something like that at them. So this is something that very much frustrated me for a number of reasons. And I think one of the biggest things that frustrated me for the most part was because Shadur is one of the most publicized players in this game, probably the most publicized player in college football right now. Everything he does is going to be scrutinized, is going to be put under a microscope, is going to be watched. And especially because he has the chance to be a top 5, a top 1, the best quarterback in the draft this upcoming year. If you think that GMs are not watching pretty much every move this guy makes, you're crazy. Just to be totally honest. If you think all of the stuff that happened with Caleb Williams this last cycle, they're watching everything that you do. And these reports are going to come out about pretty much everything you do on a daily basis, especially when you broadcast it on something like Twitter. So this to me is something that shows just kind of the way that Shadur is approaching his time at Colorado. And it's not necessarily to throw a ton of judgment towards him or say that he's taking any of this for granted or anything like that. I just think if I'm an NFL GM and I see something like that be tweeted out, I don't care that the guy is no longer on his team. I don't care that the guy was only on his team for a couple of months. That's a little bit of immaturity. I don't think there's any conversation about that. That's a little bit of, is this guy the leader that I want in my locker room? So more just what frustrated me was this is a remarkably talented kid that can do insane amounts of things in this game. He can do just remarkable things at the college football and the NFL level. He can hurt himself off the field, and it feels like he kind of is approaching this as if he can't. And that's a big issue in my eyes. So that, first off, just kind of made me frustrated because, first of all, if you're the quarterback of a college football team and you can't identify the players on your team, or you don't even remember some of the guys that were on your team, I have an issue with that, plain and simple. You don't have to, be best friends with them, but you got to at least remember who they are. You got to at least, root for them where they go and be cordial at the very least. And then I just think it's a very talented kid that could very easily get himself into trouble with stuff that has very little to do with football. And it's a frustrating thing to watch happen because this is one of the most talented kids at the quarterback position that we've seen in a while. I'll be totally honest. His ceiling is off the charts. But he can pull himself down fairly quickly because of the way that his father and him are seen as these really polarizing figures. But that's issue number one. That's just one of the problems that happened yesterday. Issue number two comes in the way of Deion. And initially when Shedeur sent out that tweet, I in my mind was thinking, okay, that'll be deleted in a couple hours because Deion will call him and they'll have a conversation and say, that's probably not the best thing in the world, let's move on. That's not what happened. Deion decided that he would come to his son's aid. There were a lot of people obviously coming after Shedeur for some of the things that I just said, not showing the leadership that you would love for your quarterback to show, being a little bit, just kind of, I don't know, it felt like kind of punching down, and it just was a little childish, in my opinion. So a lot of people were coming after him about that, and Deion decided to come to his son's aid, which obviously have no problem with. You're a father trying to protect your kid, no issue there. But he said, first he responded to just what seemingly was a random fan and said his son is going top 5 next year in the draft. Now, that can definitely happen. There's no question about that. A very talented kid. But then he tweeted something saying, essentially, he has time today. And that's one that I really don't like, but I'll get to that in a second. And then there was a tweet from an Austin Peay cornerback that was teammates with Xavier Smith when all of this was kind of happening around him, essentially just coming to his defense saying, it's not fair the way that, you guys are coming after him. It was, a little bit more aggressive of a conversation, but essentially that was the gist. And someone tweeted out that guy's stat page back to him and said, how are you talking right now? Now, first of all, the stat page was not as bad as people want to make it out to be, but that's beside the point, I suppose. If you're a rotational guy, that's a pretty normal stat line, but that's different. And then Deion decided to respond to that and essentially back up what the guy was saying and say, I want to say he said, good Lord, or something like that, but he essentially was backing up the idea that this kid was just not very good and didn't deserve to talk on one of his teammates. And man, that made me very upset. So Deion is a unique guy. He's a gregarious guy. He's going to be outspoken. He's going to speak his mind unapologetically, and he's going to be someone that ruffles feathers. That's just the reality of the situation. But frankly, this is something that a head coach of any college football team should never do. And maybe I'm, alone on that. Maybe I'm on a little bit of an island when I think that. But let's start about the tweet about the guy at Austin Peay. There is a huge issue with that for a couple of reasons. But mainly to me, it's Deion is always pitching himself. There is not a time in the day where he is not pitching himself to kids, and more importantly to parents and mothers. Let's be totally honest. Mamas have a big part to play in every kid's recruitment, and that's who you're pitching yourself to. If I'm a mom and I see someone like that actively, I don't want to say going after a kid, but, engaging in that type of talk around another kid, even if it's not, someone that has played for him. I don't necessarily care about that part of it. I just think that's a bad message to send. I think it shows that, if your kid is no longer wearing a Colorado jersey, Deion no longer has his back. In my mind, that's just kind of the way that I took it. Maybe I'm overreacting to that. Maybe he's, maybe this isn't as quite a big of a deal as I'm seeing it, but I can't imagine, as a parent, being enthused by what you saw on Twitter yesterday. And also, the first two tweets are fairly benign, and I have very little problem with him defending his son, saying he's a top 5 pick, because he has the chance to be, although if I were a betting man, I would say he will not be a top 5 pick, but we can get to that down the road. But the tweet that made me mad for a kind of weird reason, to be totally honest with you, was the one where he said he had time today. And my issue is, why do you have time? And it's not necessarily that he shouldn't have time to, take a little bit of time off and enjoy the post-spring. You've been grinding for so long, and take a little bit of time. Don't get me wrong. You should never have time for Twitter feuds. As a football coach, as at a major university, you should never have time. But especially as a football coach of a team that just went 4-8, a team that is under the most scrutiny of pretty much anyone in the entire country, a team that is going to be under a microscope every single week, a team that when you lose, you're going to be filled with comments and hate and everyone dunking on you and all of these different things. Why do you have time to respond to fans? Why do you have time to respond to all of these people that are totally inconsequential to what Colorado football is going to be this year? So that just made me mad, in the sense of, you shouldn't have time. Like, you don't have time. In fact, it's not even he shouldn't. He does not have time. His team is not where it needs to be right now. And it's not where it needs to be because he promised a playoff to his fans. He went out directly and said, we are going to make the playoff this year. So congratulations. That is the moniker. That is, get to the playoff, or this was a failure, because that's the way you put it. And the idea that he, took some time out of that busy schedule to create a playoff team to respond to a couple of fans that, frankly, you could have just gone by the wayside and gone about your business with, is insane. So Deion's always going to have crazy drama, and I, frankly, despite all of the things I just said, I do like Deion. I really do. I think he's a very fun, entertaining guy. I think he's a good coach. I think he's someone that, frankly, I don't think this article was evidence that he doesn't care about his players. I just think he doesn't handle things the way that some people kind of wish that they would be handled. And that's just kind of the way of things right now. He's more of an old school guy when it comes to that type of thing. So I really do like Deion. I think that he makes the sport fun. Obviously, he's given me plenty to talk about on here, and with all the people watching, very much appreciate that. It definitely gets some eyes. There's no doubt about that. But he's making what is already just an absolute tightrope walk. To make a team that is 4-8 go to a playoff is just insane at face value. He's making that even tighter for himself, just because the second that they lose, everything's going to rain down on them. It doesn't really matter what the loss is. Even if it's one that they're supposed to lose, it's going to rain down on them. And then this, bringing in a ton of different guys from all over the place and having a team that is kind of a pieced together amalgamation of really good players around the country, the cracks start to form pretty quickly. So this whole situation is remarkably confusing. It's been one of those things that you look down at your phone and you see a new tweet from Deion every second, and it's very frustrating. It's one of those things that I like Deion, but just stop. Just coach football. And it's not necessarily, I'm not trying to, take away his Twitter or do anything like that. It's just, get back to coaching football, walk on the field in August, and then do your talking. The best teams in the country do their talking on the field on Saturdays in the fall, not on Twitter against a random fan in May. So I don't know what's going to happen with Colorado this year. There is so much stuff bouncing around and so many variables that go into what's going on over there. But yesterday was not my favorite day. If I was a Deion fan, if I was a Colorado fan, and it didn't necessarily make me super optimistic about his future at Colorado. Not only, because of this year, but also what happens when Shadur leaves? That's a totally different segment that we can absolutely do later on, but that's the big question here, because I don't know if this message, the way that he goes about business hits quite the same when you don't have that guy that is always going to defend you tooth and nail to the end of the earth, like Shadur and like Shiloh and like Travis Hunter will do. So it'll be interesting. It's always a fun thing to watch with Colorado football, that's for sure. They put on quite the show, and one of the quotes in the article actually was, it felt like they were on a reality TV show, and it's hard to argue with that at this point. So for Deion's sake, I hope they win games, because if they don't, things get really interesting very quickly. Let's put it that way. But we'll get to all that as it comes. I'm sure this is not the last time that we will talk about Colorado. I hope it's the last time we talk about Deion tweeting at fans that he has time today, but I suppose that's always on the table. But we're going to take our second break here and get away from Deion and Colorado here for a second. We'll get back and we'll talk about some spring overreactions from the SEC. Tom Fornelli did this over at CBS. So I thought I'd do my own and kind of give you guys an idea of what I'm thinking going into this season, and some teams that I think are going to really, really set the world on fire this year. So stick with us, and we will be right back with that. I didn't mean to do that. There we go.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just spent quite some time talking about Deion in that article that came out from Max Olson over at The Athletic. We unpacked what has been a weird couple of days around the Colorado program. First of all, I just want to thank everyone for listening. This might just have to become a Colorado program from here on forward, but now it's time to get into some spring reactions, and let's talk about the SEC, because Tom Fornelli did this over at CBS, and I thought this was a great idea. Obviously, I will not be stealing his overreactions, so I have some that might be a little bit more aggressive than the ones he put out there, to be totally honest with you. But let's jump right in, and let's talk about the team that everyone is talking about going into this year in the SEC, and Georgia. And frankly, I think this Georgia team is better than the past 3 years, and that sounds crazy. I totally get that. These past 3 years have been insane in Athens, Georgia. They have had teams that have been off the charts good, but there's one huge difference between this year and the past 3 years in my mind, and it's the offense. I think Carson Beck at the controls at quarterback is insane. Mike Bobo, having him kind of both of them being an absolute lockstep. If they ran a three-legged race, they would win by 100 meters. These guys are absolutely share a brain and just know exactly what they want to do. The run game between Trevor Etienne, Branson Robinson, Roderick Robinson is going to be insane. They have so many different ways to attack you. Trevor Etienne is one of the best receiving backs in the country. Branson Robinson and Roderick Robinson are going to run straight through you, which is always the way that Georgia fans love to see the ball be run. You have the O-line that is as stout as it's going to be in college football. There are so many guys across that line that are just incredible. Tate Ratledge coming back is absolutely huge. Jared Curtis taking over for Cedric Van Pran at center is a huge one, but the kid is an absolute athlete. He could play defensive end if he wanted to. So this kid can absolutely move. I don't think they're going to have any problem with him at center. And the wide receiver group is more deep and dynamic than I've really ever seen at UGA, to be totally honest with you. I think UGA has had better top-end receivers in the past. You know, you had Ladd McConkey, you had even way back when you had A.J. Green and Malcolm Mitchell and Chris Conley and some of these really, really good receivers up top. They have like 5 guys that can make big-time plays at the wide receiver position. You have Dominic Lovett that I think will end up leading the way for the most part. You have Ra Thomas that is coming along great. London Humphreys coming over from Vandy is awesome. Dylan Bell is kind of your Swiss Army knife, Deebo Samuel type guy that can do literally anything you want him to do, including throw a touchdown pass, which he did a year ago. There's so many guys and so many different skill sets. And then just for fun, you have who I think might be the best athlete in the country, and Anthony Evans out there at wide receiver as well. So many different skill sets, abilities, and ways to make defenses just guess for the most part. The offense is going to be good. I have very, very few questions about that. But that doesn't mean this defense is going to be bad by any means. This defense is going to be dominant. And I think the D-line was a big topic of conversation. Some people thought they would be a little bit more active than they have been in the portal, especially at that position. But Kirby Smart seems to be okay, and frankly, if Kirby Smart is okay with his defense, I have no questions. So bringing in Xavier McLeod for that defensive line was absolutely huge. I think him and Nazir Stackhouse is a very, very competent duo. And then you have edge rushers that are just remarkable. I think Mykel Williams is going to have a fantastic year. I think Jalen Walker is a guy that is going to burst onto the scene and make some huge plays for them. The linebackers, honestly, are insanely good. They might be the best linebacker group in the entire country. Between C.J. Allen, Smile Munden, and Raylan Wilson, you have 3 guys that can absolutely play on pretty much any roster in the entire country. And then you have Justin Williams coming in as a freshman, very talented kid that can absolutely help them there. And then in the back end, that's kind of like a little bit of a worry area, especially at corner. But again, didn't go after kids in the portal, and I tend to lean in the way of Kirby Smart thinks they're okay. They're okay. They have plenty of guys there. Daniel Harris is going to play a big part. Ellis Robinson coming in as a freshman will probably be maybe not a starter, probably not a starter, frankly, but will be a big part of that defense. And then you have who I think is one of the best defensive players in the entire country. Some would say the best defensive player in the entire country with Malachi Starks. So this team is scary good. They're truly just insane, and just add Peyton Woodring into the conversation as one of the best kickers in the country. I think this team is as complete as that they've had over the last couple of years. It felt like there was one side of the ball that was just a little bit behind the other in the past couple of years. That's no longer the case. These guys are going to be insane, and I think they can do things that will set all types of records this year. But we'll get to that, and we'll see what happens there. But this team is just terrifyingly good. But then let's get to Bama, and this one is one that we've talked about a lot on here. That back end has been absolutely gutted. They have had so many guys that have walked out the door. 3 guys to the NFL. Jalen Key, who is actually Mr. Irrelevant this year. You had Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold, who were huge players for you at the corner positions. And then you lost all the guys in the transfer portal, and things got a lot more sketchy. Antonio Kite absolutely would have played for them at corner, along with Trey Amos, who would have been a starter, played some really good minutes in the playoff games and in the SEC championship. And then you lose someone like Caleb Downs, who I've said time and again on here, I think is the best defensive player in the country. Losing all those guys on that back end is insane. It's something that usually does not happen, especially at somewhere like Alabama. And on top of that, they face teams like UGA, LSU, Tennessee, Missouri, Oklahoma. All of these teams have either remarkable wide receivers on the outside, will have incredible passing attacks, will attack you in so many different ways. But, excuse me, I think when you look at UGA, we just talked about it, so many guys to cover. When you look at LSU, that offense is going to be okay. I promise you that, and we'll get to that in this next overreaction here. Tennessee is going to throw the ball a ton, and as long as Nico Iamaleava can be accurate, they'll be more than fine. Missouri, Luther Burden is a nightmare to match up with, and they don't really have a guy that I can feel confident that can go out there and match up with them the same way you have Terrion Arnold or Kool-Aid McKinstry a year ago. And then you have Oklahoma, who is kind of a wild card, but tons of talent at that wide receiver room. You have Nick Anderson, you have Deion Burks, you have so many guys that can make big time differences. So this is a very, very dangerous proposition for Bama. If they don't figure out that back end, I think there's realities where some of these games look like LSU games from a year ago. Now, they'll be better overall defense than LSU, I can promise you that, but you will see some broken coverages, you will see some big plays, and I think it could cost them some games and make some Bama fans a little bit angry. But let's get to some of these quarterbacks, and specifically one, Garrett Nussmeier, I think is one of the most overlooked players in the entire country. Jaden Daniels just walked out the door with a Heisman Trophy. He was the best quarterback in the country a year ago, one of the best over the last couple of years. So there's a lot of big-time shoes to fill, but I think Garrett Nussmeier is more than capable of filling them. I think this kid has more arm talent than Jaden Daniels, can throw the ball from pretty much any arm angle, any stance, can do it in a number of different ways, has great pocket mobility, and just on top of all of that, the O-line is going to be incredible. I frankly think this is the best O-line in the country with LSU, and I think there are so many things that he's going to be able to do given the time. Obviously, you're losing some of those incredible receivers that you had a year ago, but it is no slouch of a group that they have around this time around. They have C.J. Daniels, who came over from Liberty. You have Kyron Lacey. You have one of the best tight ends in the country in Mason Taylor. So they should be more than fine there, and I think Garrett Nussmeier is going to absolutely light it up this year. Now, do I think they're going to go back-to-back on Heisman's? Probably not, but this kid, I think, will be a top 10 quarterback in the country and will really prove who he is and really burst onto the scene. This next one is a little bit weird, I won't lie to you, kind of hard to explain, but I'll do my best. Florida will be a good team. They just won't win a lot. This Florida team throughout spring, it feels like they are moving in the right direction. It feels like a lot of the things that have been lacking in the last couple of years are finally there, at least in terms of culture and in terms of roster construction and roster continuity, which is a huge part of this. I just think this schedule is a nightmare. I think they could be a very good team and lose 5 games or lose 6 games. Frankly, I think they could be a top 25 team and go 7-5. I'm being totally honest. They finished the year with, I don't know if this is the exact order, but it goes UGA at Texas, you have at Ole Miss, Tennessee, Florida State, all of those teams in the last 5 games of the season. That's just mean. I don't know who set up the schedules. I don't know why they have it out for Florida, but it's going to be impossible for this team to be a SEC contender, to be a playoff contender, to do some of the things that I'm sure Florida fans would love for them to do, but with this schedule, it's near impossible. Like Georgia or Ohio State would not go undefeated against this schedule. So I think it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch. The question is, obviously, will they stick with Billy Napier or will he be canned after that season? Because it's a weird thing, you see good football happening on the field, but the record does not show that by any means. So it'll be an interesting conversation, but I think they're going to be a good team. I just think they're just going to go up against it in the SEC, frankly. But let's jump over to Texas and talk about that D-line, because that's a huge, huge conversation. They lost the 2 forces on the interior defensive line in Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, 2 guys that were absolutely dominant last year, made that one of the best run defenses in the entire country, and that's why they were taken where they were in the NFL draft. So you really need to find some replacements there, but that will not be the strength of this defensive line. They have guys on the edge like Ethan Burke, Barron Sorrell, Trey Moore, Colin Simmons. All of these guys can get after the quarterback, and not only get after the quarterback, but put him on the ground, which was the big problem with them last year, where you would get all of this interior pressure, and you would have a edge rusher coming off the edge, but they just wouldn't be able to get the guy on the ground, or they would get a hand on him, and then he'd be able to escape out of the pocket. That is a huge problem for Texas, and I think the edge rushing is going to be a huge point of emphasis for them and really make them a force to be reckoned with. Now, you need some push from the interior defensive line, so you absolutely need guys to step up there. There's no doubt about that, but I do think the edge rushing will at least help them kind of cancel out some of the deficiencies, I suppose, they have in the interior defensive line now that could go away very quickly if they were able to add Dominic Williams from the transfer portal, but we'll get to that if they can pull that off. But I think it's just going to be a different attack from this defensive line. I don't think it's going to be necessarily any worse. I just think it's going to be more of a let's hit the quarterback. Let's get him on his butt. Not, we're going to wear down these teams and just abuse these offensive linemen over and over until they quit type of vibe. So it'll be really interesting to watch that. And then this final one, honestly, might not be an overreaction. It might just be a fact. The SEC is going to have the best quarterback play in the country by far. These quarterbacks are just out of this world. You talk about the top line guys in Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers, Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe. All of those guys are proven entities. They know exactly what they're going to do. They are going to rip the ball around. They're going to play really, really good football this upcoming year. Then you have guys like Garrett Nussmeier, Nico Iamaleava, Brock Vandegrift, Connor Wegman, who really just because of injuries is not, a little bit higher on this list, frankly, and Jackson Arnold, all guys that I think are going to be the future of the quarterback position in all of college football, not just in the SEC, are going to be huge names across college football. And then you add in Brady Cook, Graham Mertz, Peyton Thorne, who are all going to give you really solid quarterback play and not make many mistakes. Brady Cook is a fantastic player. And then Taven Green and Diego Pavia. Oh my goodness. Diego Pavia coming over from the G5. I think this is a really, really fun group. I think there's so many different things that could happen here, but the quarterback play is going to be off the charts, and it's going to be different quarterback play, different styles, but man, it's going to be really fun to watch some of these matchups because pretty much every week you're going to get an absolute classic quarterback matchup. But that's what I got for you right now. We will definitely continue to revisit this, probably go around the conferences, and then maybe make our way back around because we got plenty of time between now and the first game kicking off. But we're going to take our third break here, and when we come back, we got a Hot Take Thursday for you, and we're going to talk about what these next couple of months mean and how important they are to possibly lifting that trophy at the end of the year. So stick with us, and we will be right back with that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about some spring overreactions coming from the SEC. Had some players that I felt like were going to be absolutely incredible this year. The quarterback play is going to be off the charts. But before I jump into this last segment, I just wanted to thank everyone that is watching. This is comfortably the most people that I've had watching live, so very, very cool. I really, really appreciate everyone tuning in. But let's get to a Hot Take Thursday. And this might be a hot take, this might not be. I feel like there's some talk around this, but who knows? I'll throw it out there and we'll decide later. But May is over, or May is here, excuse me. May is here, spring practices and spring games are over, and the important months are really just getting underway. Frankly, I think these are the months where you win championships. There is a lot of that talk of, grind and silence type time you have between spring practice and summer workouts, and frankly, it's true. These are where championship teams separate themselves from everyone else, and a lot of this stuff might sound kind of trivial, a lot of this stuff might sound not that big of a deal when you actually lace them up, but I promise you it does. You will see that whatever team ends up being in the playoff, making a crazy run, being, the team that ends up lifting the trophy, I promise you that you will see a number of pictures and a number of stories about them working out together or going on vacation together or whatever over the next little bit. But there's a couple of different things that kind of go into this, and I think one of the biggest things is you look at championship teams, especially over the last couple of years in Michigan and the two UGA teams that won the last 3 years. I think the one thing that really, really stood out to me, and I think stood out to a number of people when you were watching those teams, was it felt like everyone there was genuinely good friends, genuinely cared for one another, genuinely felt like these are, my other family. And it felt like that came a lot from that leadership that comes from the top down, where you hold your guys accountable and you kind of keep everyone in line. And that doesn't happen until you're really good friends. I'm sure a lot of you have this experience where someone new will say something to you that maybe it's telling you to do something or something like that. You're much less inclined to do it with someone that you don't respect or don't care for than if your friend asks you to do something and asks you to push yourself or asks you to give in that extra work. You're much more willing to do that for your friend than someone that you just met or someone that you don't trust. So this is where that happens. There's a lot of guys that come into a team, especially with the transfer portal now, during spring and really only have spring camp to be around the team. And spring camp is a very intense time, especially for kids coming in as freshmen where you're adapting to a lot of this stuff. And it's not that they don't have time to, hang out with each other outside of football and everything, but a lot of it is go work out, go to class, recover, and then come back and do it again the next day. There's not necessarily this real gap in time to really kind of enjoy the simple things in life and go out to have a meal and take a little vacation and do the little things that add up in a lot of ways. So getting together with your position group and working out together, whether it's quarterbacks going out and getting more of a rapport with the receivers, especially in the transfer portal era where you need to know what guys are going to do. You need to know, when this guy gets to the top of his corner route, he likes to break this way. When, he's running a curl, he takes this many steps and it's this type of rhythm. Those things can win or lose you football games, because especially on things like curls and things like comeback routes, where if that's not on time and on target, it could be picked and run, 60 yards the other direction. So all of these things really, really add up. And obviously you do that during spring practice. You do a ton of that, but everyone does that. There's not a team in the country that doesn't do spring practice and doesn't go through at least similar drills. We did see a weird video from Florida State spring practice where they had quarterbacks tackling, but that's an anomaly. I don't know what was going on there. But I think they go through this in spring practice, obviously. But the teams that really separate themselves are the ones that do it when no one's watching, right? When no one is out there yelling at them, when the coaches aren't allowed to be out there. Excuse me. When the coaches aren't allowed to be out there yelling at them, that's when you win football games, frankly, because there's a couple of different things that happen during that time. One, you just become closer with the guys that you're hanging around with. Going through trials and tribulations with people make you very close. And some of those workouts you can definitely categorize as trials and tribulations, because, man, do they work their butt off. So a lot of this is just, getting in the room together, working out together, and putting yourself through that physical pain. It's a bonding experience. It's very interesting, but it definitely is. And then you get, a couple of inside jokes. You get a couple of laughs. You get to know these guys a little bit better. You get to maybe meet their families and do little things that, get lunch together, have game nights, enjoy a responsible night out. I want to put that in there for sure. But all of these things matter. And they, you won't see a lot of them. You won't necessarily see, Carson Beck and Dylan Bell getting lunch together in downtown Athens. You won't see Quinn Ewers and Isaiah Bond getting together for a night out. You won't necessarily see all this in real time, but it'll show up. I promise you that. Because when we look at football as a whole, the football that we all love and we all, watch every Saturday, it's war. There's really no other way to put it. These guys strap on helmets, they strap on shoulder pads, and they fly at each other for 4 hours. And it's kind of insane, to be totally honest with you. It's one of the things that we love about the sport, that all of the guys on that field are doing something that is a little wild. And the only real way for them to do that with the utmost confidence and do that with the utmost comfortability is to look to your left and right and know that those guys have your back and know that you have their back and know that, you are quote unquote brothers. You are people that have been through tough times together, but also have shared a lot of really good times and have developed a bond that doesn't go away after football. And that's the biggest thing in championship teams, where you'll see 5 years later where you'll see Georgia players, whether it's Jordan Davis and Stetson Bennett, getting together to, have lunch or whatever. It doesn't necessarily matter. It's just some of these teams, you can see the bond, and it doesn't stop once football ends. And that's the biggest thing that can happen over these next couple of weeks, these next couple of months, where these guys can really get to know each other and really become friends. And I think one of the things that have said a million times, and I think really applies to quarterbacks, and is one of the reasons that quarterbacks are a little bit unfairly criticized at times, but we can get to that in a different segment. The most important thing in any sport, particularly team sports, in my personal opinion, is confidence in yourself and the people around you. You have to be able to fully trust these guys. You have to be able to feel incredibly confident in not only your abilities, but the ability of the guy behind you. The defensive tackle, if the defensive tackle hates the safety or the linebacker that's right behind him, he's not going to trust him to make that tackle. And it's going to cause him to force on some plays and make a mistake. That's then going to put a linebacker or a safety in a bad situation. So all of this has consequences. And if your defensive tackle is friends with your safety, and your safety is friends with your wide receiver, and your wide receiver is friends with your kicker, all of this just becomes so much easier. When a guy scores and you have a million people mobbing him, not just his position group or not just the quarterback that threw him the pass, it means more. It shows you what this team is really about, and it shows you that when May hit, when they were able to walk away from spring practice and were officially able to, take a deep breath and take some time off, they didn't. They got back together. They went out on the field in, nighttime and got passes up and got kicks up and went out to dinner afterwards and enjoyed each other's company and developed this bond that is just so important to being a successful football team. So people have said this before. It might not be as hot of a take as I've made it out to be, I'll be totally honest. People have said that these months are remarkably important before, but I just think some people, shrug it off, sort of. Some people say, yeah, it's important, but, not as important as the practices that go on. And maybe that's the case, but I'll be totally honest with you. I think there's an ability that you can unlock if you use these months correctly. Not only from a, playing standpoint with these players being on the same page and, having as much rapport with your quarterback and receivers as possible and all of that type of stuff on field, but holding guys accountable is infinitely easier when you're friends with them. Yelling at guys when it needs to happen is infinitely easier when you're friends with them, because it's coming from a place of love. It's coming from a place of care, and it's not coming from a place of, this guy sucks, I need this guy off my team. That guy cares about you, and this is when that happens. This is when those bonds are formed, especially for those young guys or those transfer portal guys coming in. So I'm not saying that, if a team is, not together every second of the day, they're screwed. I promise that is not the case. But I can almost promise you that in January, when we see a team lift a trophy, there will be a quote that will come out from one of those players saying, it was the times in May, it was the times after spring practice, it was the countless hours we were out there without our coaches, or it was the lunch that we got every day because it became a tradition during this time of the year, and it made us closer, and it made us, essentially share a brain. You will hear stories about, this guy went out of his way to take me out to dinner and tell me that I'm going to be a fantastic player, but I'm going to hold you accountable, and that made it so much easier for me to develop as a young player. So there's a million different ways to kind of go about this and kind of make this argument, but I cannot overstate just how important these days are, these weeks are, these months are, because a championship team is going to be born in this couple of weeks. Now, a couple of them will, and then they'll figure it out on the field, but the teams that separate themselves, the teams that find their way into the playoff, and especially find their way onto the field in the national title, they will be the teams that you see, some going on vacation together, some getting lunch together, some doing the little things, being out in the field in pitch black with the lights coming down on them, throwing passes. All that stuff matters, and all that stuff gets to happen now without the coach yelling at you. So it's an opportunity that some people squander, but the teams that win the title absolutely do not. So it'll be a really interesting thing to watch over the next couple of weeks. But I love this time of year. I think it's a very interesting time of year where you don't get to see it in real time. You don't get to see it, plastered on every TV around the world. But if you're paying attention, you can find the team that or the teams that are kind of utilizing these months the way that they're supposed to be utilized. But we'll figure out who those teams are, right? We'll figure out in January and December who those teams are that have separated themselves over the next 2 months. But we'll get to that when we get there. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram for all of the content and updates. We have 1 million people doing incredible work around pretty much every sport you could possibly want. So definitely tune in to all of those shows if you want any of that. Thank you again for all of the people watching today. It honestly is very, very cool to see that number continue to rise, but very much appreciate it. Thank you for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.